first snowfall in Lochdubh uncovers something far darker than winter's calm, drawing Hamish Macbeth into a quiet mystery. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And if you enjoy settling into these Highland mysteries, subscribe and make this part of your nightly ritual. Only 11% are subscribed while 89% aren't, and your support truly really means a lot. The shouting reached Hamish before he saw anything. It carried across the cold morning air in a way that meant trouble, the sort of noise boys made only when they had found something they should not have. Lugs whined and trotted ahead, his paws sending up small bursts of frost from the hard ground. Hamish followed, already tired of the day, and it had barely begun. Down by the edge of the loch, a group of schoolboys stood in a ragged huddle. They kept looking at the ice, then at Hamish, then back again as if hoping he might pretend he hadn't seen them. Their faces were pale. One boy pointed a shaking finger. Hamish felt a prickle of annoyance. What is it now? Another ghost? The tallest boy swallowed. It's a body, Mr. Macbeth. Hamish walked to the edge. The ice had frozen thin in patches. Beneath one patch lay a pale shape caught halfway between sinking and surfacing. The hair, stiff with frost, spread out under the ice like dull weeds. Hamish felt a jump in his stomach, sharp and unwelcome. The girl's coat sleeve drifted slightly as if arguing with the current. He didn't need to see her face to know she was dead. Right, away from here, he said. All of you. The boys backed off, grateful to run. Their boots skidded on the old snow. Word would be all over Lochdubh in minutes. Hamish stepped closer to the loch, testing the ground. Lug sat, staring at the ice with low, rumbling breaths. Hamish didn't blame him. The loch had a way of making death look quiet. He went to the station to call for help. The landline crackled like it resented being used. He managed to reach Strathbane, though they made him repeat himself twice. When he returned to the shore, half the village was already there. They stood in heavy coats, muttering and pointing and acting shocked in the loud way some did, when they were pleased to have something to talk about. Patel said, "Terrible business, Hamish. They say she was glowing under the ice like a lantern. Is that true?" "No," Hamish said. "She wasn't glowing." Mrs. Harris said, "I told Morag it would be a woman. Didn't I say? A woman in white always means tragedy." Hamish ignored her. He moved along the bank, looking at the ice. The body had shifted slightly. He could make out the face now. Fiona Campbell. He remembered her from a week ago, walking through the village with a brisk step that suggested she didn't think much of the place. A Strathbane police car skidded up onto the verge. Blair climbed out, followed by Anderson, who looked annoyed to be awake. Blair marched over, puffing himself up. "Well, Macbeth," Blair said, "looks like your ghost story has turned up something real. Or did your ghost kill the lassie?" Hamish kept his tone flat. "The boys found her." "Boys," Blair gave a snort. "Should have let them handle it. Better minds than yours." Hamish felt his face heat. He turned back to the loch. Blair shoved past him as if claiming ownership of the body. He barked orders at Anderson, who pretended to understand. A second car pulled up. Hamish's heart sank as he saw Priscilla Halberton Smythe step out. She moved across the snow in that calm, distant way she had, wearing a long coat that probably cost more than Hamish made in 2 months. She nodded at him briefly, then looked toward the ice. "That's Fiona Campbell," she said quietly. "She worked on a charity project my mother supported." Hamish tried to think of something neutral to say. Instead he said, "Well, she won't be doing much charity now." Priscilla's expression tightened, the smallest shift, but enough. Hamish wanted to kick himself. He looked away, pretending to study the ice. Lugs pressed against his leg as if embarrassed for him. Blair gave a loud laugh. "Trust Macbeth to offer comfort like a crofter's shovel." Priscilla ignored Blair, which irritated him further. Blair turned his temper back to Hamish. "And tell your mutt to stop staring at me," Blair snapped. "I'll shoot the beast if he twitches." Lugs growled, low and steady. Hamish put a hand on the dog's neck before Blair used it as an excuse to make a scene. He wished Lugs would growl louder, but that would only hurt things more. The Strathbane team moved awkwardly across the ice with ropes and poles. It took too long. Anderson almost fell in, which pleased Hamish more than it should have. Finally, they pulled the body out. Fiona Campbell's face looked peaceful in a rude way, as if death had removed all the sharpness she carried when alive. One of the villagers gasped. Another crossed herself. Patel murmured something about curses. Hamish found himself looking at Fiona's wrist. Her watch hung crookedly, the glass cracked. The hand stopped at 9:20. Blair noticed him watching. "What? Going to tell us the time of her murder with your village magic?" "It's a broken watch, Blair," Hamish said. "Anyone can see that." Blair sneered. "Aye, but you'll write it in your wee notebook like you're some great detective." Hamish didn't bother replying. Instead, he knelt to look at Fiona's hand. She had one finger bent in an odd angle. Something red was caught under her nail. A tiny thread. Wool, by the look of it. The villagers were too busy whispering to notice. He leaned closer. Lugg sniffed once, more out of confusion than interest. Hamish didn't pick up the thread. Blair would accuse him of planting evidence. Blair accused him of planting things even when he wasn't in the same room. Priscilla stepped near him. She looked down at Fiona with a faint sadness that made Hamish feel clumsy again. He said, "She must have fallen. Ice is thin in parts." Priscilla said, "Hamish, please. You can see it wasn't a simple fall." He wished she hadn't said his name in that patient tone. "We'll know when Strathbane finishes," he said. "Which means never," she said, and walked away. Blair puffed out his chest. "Everyone step back. This is a crime scene. Macbeth, get your dog under control or I'll toss him in the back of the car." Luggs growled again. Hamish touched his head lightly. "Quiet," he murmured, though he wished he could let the dog lunge just once. Villagers stood stubbornly close, ignoring Blair until he shouted at them. They stepped back in tiny increments, glaring at him from the sides of their eyes. Blair shouted louder, then blamed Hamish for not managing them. "You can't even spell forensics, Macbeth," Blair yelled. "I should have brought someone who knew what he was doing." Hamish looked past Blair at the white stretch of the loch. He felt the humiliation settle like cold ash. The villagers were watching. Priscilla had heard it too. Hamish kept his voice calm. "I'm doing my job." "Are you?" Blair said. "You think ghosts and footprints are clues. God help us." Hamish had no reply that wouldn't make things worse. He stood there, silent, while the Strathbane men lifted Fiona's body onto a stretcher. Her arms swung slightly. The broken watch glinted once, then went dull again. The villagers drifted away in messy clusters, eager to carry the news across Lochdubh. By tonight, the story would grow antlers. By tomorrow, someone would accuse Hamish of hiding the killer under his own bed. Priscilla spoke to him before leaving. "Hamish, if you learn anything, I'll let you know," he said too quickly. She nodded, distant again, already halfway into her car. Blair stomped over. "Don't start playing detective. Leave the thinking to us." Hamish said nothing. He let Blair believe whatever made him feel large. When everyone had gone, Hamish stood alone with Luggs beside the loch. The ice was still. The snow would fall again soon and cover every trace. He didn't know why Fiona Campbell had been at the loch, or why she had that red thread under her nail, but Blair would mishandle it. Blair mishandled everything. Hamish rubbed Luggs's ear. "We'll need to be careful," he said quietly. "Very careful." Luggs only leaned closer, warm against his leg. Hamish looked at the loch one last time. The cracked watch, the red thread, Priscilla's look, Blair's sneer, all of it sat badly with him. He would ask questions, but quietly. If Strathbane knew he was digging around, they'd slap him down again. And this time Blair might enjoy it enough to make it stick. He walked back toward the village. The cold air settled behind him like a closing door. Luggs trotted at his side, ears twitching at every sound. Hamish felt the unease settle in his chest. It would not leave soon. Hamish arrived at the McIver farm, already regretting it. The air smelled of silage and cold stone, and Luggs gave a low, unhappy snort, as if sharing his opinion. Something was wrong before Hamish even knocked. The hens were quieter than usual, and a bucket lay tipped on its side in the yard, frozen water spilling over it like a badly made sculpture. Hamish rapped his knuckles on the door. It swung open too quickly, which was never a good sign. Ian McIver stood there, big-shouldered and red-faced, the sort of man who looked older than he was because he never stopped scowling. "Aye, what now?" he said, as if Hamish were trying to sell him something. Hamish kept his tone mild. "I need a word about Fiona Campbell, the nurse." Ian's jaw tightened. "I said all I needed to say to Blair." Hamish stepped inside anyway. Luggs hesitated, then followed, sniffing the threshold as though it offended him. Inside, the kitchen smelled of damp wool. Mrs. McIver sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from. She had the pale look of someone who didn't want to be seen at all. Hamish nodded at her. "Morning." She nodded back but didn't speak. Ian stood stiffly beside the stove like a guard dog blocking the heat. "Fiona came here last week," Hamish said. "Tell me again why." "To get eggs," Ian said. "For some hospital charity thing." Hamish waited. "That all?" Ian's eyes darted toward his wife, then back. "That's all. She wanted eggs. I gave her a dozen. Off she went." He crossed his arms as if that settled every matter. Hamish felt the lie long before he understood it. It sat in the air like a sour smell. Mrs. McIver wouldn't look up. She kept rubbing her thumb along the handle of her mug in small nervous strokes. Hamish studied her briefly. She flinched when she realized he was watching. Ian noticed her flinch and scowled harder. Hamish said, "Strange for a nurse to come all the way out here for eggs." "Folk do strange things," Ian said, "especially nurses." Mrs. McIver's mug clinked against the table just slightly. Hamish glanced at it. A tiny splash of tea had dried on the wood in a rusty blotch. He felt lugs press against his leg. The dog wasn't tense, only uncomfortable. Good enough. Hamish looked at Ian again. "You're sure she didn't come for anything else? Didn't speak to you about anything?" Ian's voice rose. "You calling me a liar?" "No," Hamish said. "I'm asking questions. It's my job." "You're implying something all the same." Mrs. McIver murmured, barely audible. "Ian, dinner." He shot her a glare. She fell silent. Hamish's irritation sharpened. He didn't like bullies, especially domestic ones. "Someone in Lochdubh said they saw her walking away from here in a hurry," he said, lying without remorse. "Look troubled." Ian blinked once, thrown off. "Nobody saw anything. Whoever said that is daft." "So she didn't leave in a hurry." "She left normal," Ian snapped. "Walked off same as she came. You're twisting things." Hamish sighed. It wasn't going anywhere. He had nothing to hold the man on except instinct, and instinct didn't impress anyone in Strathbane. He nodded once, pretending he accepted the story. "All right," he said. "If you remember anything else, let me know." Ian puffed up. "I've told you what happened. Stop stirring." Hamish ignored the dismissal and looked once more at Mrs. McIver. She stared at her mug as if hoping to drown in it. Hamish nearly asked her directly, but stopped. Ian would only make it worse for her later. Hamish knew that sort of man. He stepped out into the yard. Lugs followed quickly, relieved. Hamish muttered, "A liar wrapped in a liar's coat." It wasn't elegant, but it cheered him slightly. Snow began to drift again as he walked back toward the station. A wind cut across the road, slicing at his ears. Lochdubh looked almost calm from a distance, which usually meant it wasn't. Inside the station, the phone rang before Hamish even hung up his coat. He answered with a sigh. "Hamish, it's Morag from the post office. That ghost woman, she was seen again, this time near the kirkyard, wearing white." Hamish rubbed his forehead. "Morag, have you been at the sherry?" She gasped. "I never touch a drop before noon." "Well, maybe today's the day." He hung up before she could sputter more. The phone rang again immediately. It was Mrs. McLean from the hotel. "I saw a figure in white too, Hamish, right outside the back door, floating." "You saw steam from the kitchen vent," Hamish said, and hung up. He barely had time to breathe when the phone rang again. This time it was Patel. "Constable, I swear I saw Priscilla Halberton Smythe walking by the loch last night in a long white coat. Very elegant, very ghost-like. Perhaps she is distressed." Hamish nearly dropped the phone. "Patel, Priscilla owns a dozen coats, none ghost-like. She doesn't haunt lochs." "Well, perhaps she should," Patel said, which made no sense, so Hamish hung up again. The phone rang a fourth time. He didn't answer it. He let it ring until it stopped. Lugs wandered over, tail flicking anxiously, and bumped against the desk. The teacup Hamish had set there wobbled. "Watch yourself," Hamish said, but a beat too late. Lugs's tail swept the cup clean off its spot. It toppled, splashing tea across Hamish's notes. He grabbed the papers with a grunt, annoyed at himself for leaving the cup near the edge. The tea soaked one sheet completely. Another page slid partly under the desk, leaving a streak of brownish red across it. Hamish frowned and pulled the page up. The smear wasn't tea, it looked darker. He turned the page to the light. A small red mark sat near the corner, half washed out by the spill. It looked familiar. He remembered the red wool thread under Fiona Campbell's nail. The colour was the same. He stared at the mark. He didn't remember making it, and he had no idea how it got on his notes. The station was cold, but sweat prickled the back of his neck. Before he could think further, the door slammed open. Blair barged in with Anderson at his heels. "Macbeth, hiding witnesses now, are you?" Hamish rolled his eyes. "What are you on about?" "Villagers are phoning Strathbane," Blair said, delighted, "saying you're ignoring sightings, covering for folk, maybe helping someone slip away." Hamish stared. "Blair, don't be daft. Lochdubh gossips for sport." "Maybe, but you take them seriously. That's what makes you dangerous. You care too much about silly villagers and their silly tales." Hamish's jaw tightened. He kept his voice steady. "I'm doing the job you lot should be doing." "And failing at it," Blair said. "Daviot wants a word, says you're interfering again." Hamish felt the humiliation like a slap. Blair enjoyed every flicker of discomfort on his face. "And Anderson," Blair added, "tell Macbeth what you said earlier." Anderson shifted, smirking. "Just that ghosts might do a better job than he does." Blair laughed loudly. "Aye, even the dead lass could point out clues better than Macbeth." Lugs barked, sharp and angry. Blair jumped back, then tried to disguise it by glaring at the dog. "You should put that beast down," Blair snapped, "before he bites someone important." Hamish stepped forward. "Leave." Blair looked triumphant, as if he'd achieved some great victory. "Daviot wants your report tonight. Don't be late. Try to spell things properly." They left with the same noise and smell as a passing lorry. Hamish stood very still. Lugs pressed against him, low rumble in his chest. Hamish reached down, giving one slow scratch behind the dog's ear. He looked again at the red smear on the paper, the same colour as the thread beneath Fiona's nail. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. Either way, Blair would ruin it if he ever saw it. Hamish folded the page and tucked it inside his coat. He didn't know yet what it meant, but he knew Fiona Campbell hadn't come to Lochdubh for eggs. He walked to the window and stared out at the village, the roofs white, the smoke thin, the people already carrying the wrong stories from door to door. Hamish felt anger settle inside him, quiet, necessary. "All right," he murmured. "If no one else will find out who she came to meet, I will." Lugs wagged his tail once, the movement oddly solemn. Hamish didn't feel satisfied, only resolved. Outside, Lochdubh looked peaceful again. It was lying. Morag MacLean arrived at the station looking as if she had run the whole way from the post office, though it was barely 2 minutes' walk. Her hair stuck out under her knitted hat like frightened straw. Hamish heard her puffing even before she reached the door. Lugs, half asleep on the rug, lifted his head and gave a doubtful grunt. Hamish shared the sentiment. Morag burst in without knocking. "Hamish Macbeth, I've done something terrible." She clutched her handbag as if it might fly away. Hamish felt the familiar heaviness that came when villagers started sentences like that. "Sit down then," he said. "If it's about the television licence again—" "It's not," she snapped, too flustered to be polite. "It's about the dead nurse, Fiona Campbell." Hamish straightened. "What about her?" Morag pressed a hand to her chest. "She posted a parcel, 3 nights before she died, from Lochdubh, addressed to herself at the hospital." Hamish frowned. Folk sometimes post things to themselves. "Yes, but—" Morag lowered her voice as though gossip were dangerous. "I forgot to send it on." Hamish blinked. "You forgot." She nodded miserably. "It slipped behind the counter. There was a rush that morning, and Mrs. Duff was asking after her pension, and the stamp roll had jammed." "When did you realise?" "Just now," she whispered. "But the parcel is gone." "Gone where?" "I don't know. I went to get it, and it wasn't there." Hamish stood. "Show me." Morag wrung her hands and hurried back outside, forcing Hamish into an awkward trot to keep up. Lugs bounded after them, sensing tension and wanting no part of it, yet refusing to be left behind. Inside the post office, the smell of dust and old envelopes hung in the air. The counters were clean enough, but the storeroom at the back looked as if a careless wind had blown through it. Morag pointed to a narrow space behind a crate of outdated catalogues. "It should have been right there," she said. "Small brown parcel. Strong twine. I meant to send it. Really, I did." Hamish squeezed behind the crate, muttering under his breath about tight spaces and careless postmistresses. Lugs stuck his nose in after him, snuffling at every box. Something caught Hamish's eye. A scrap of brown paper lay half-crushed against the skirting board. He pulled it free. It was torn, one edge soaked through with some dark, watery stain. Not tea, not ink, something else. His skin prickled. He crouched lower and saw the rest of the parcel buried beneath old circulars. The paper had split open, its contents exposed. Inside lay a piece of lace curtain, stained with a thin, rusty smear. Hamish held it up. "Morag, what the devil?" "I didn't do that," she cried. "It must have happened while it was back here. I never opened it." Hamish examined the lace. It was familiar. Kirk lace, thin, old-fashioned, the type meant to look delicate but mostly succeeded in gathering dust. He thought of the vestry window. He had noticed one corner looked shorter lately, though he had dismissed it at the time as age. He reached deeper into the torn paper and found a small envelope. On the front, in neat handwriting, were the words for Ian. Hamish's stomach tightened. "Ian McIver?" Morag nodded nervously. "Yes, that would be him. I don't know what it means." Hamish slipped the envelope into his pocket before she could see more. He did not trust her not to blurt it out at the Kirk Hall by tea-time. "Who else comes back here?" he asked. "No one," she said quickly. "Well, cleaners sometimes, and Mrs. Duff when she insists on helping, but she hasn't been in since she fell." "Anyone else?" Morag hesitated just long enough to annoy him. "Well, Mr. Patel sometimes leaves boxes if his storeroom is full, and Jessie from the hotel asks to borrow string, but no one would touch a posted parcel. They know better." Hamish doubted that. Folk in Lochdubh always knew better until they didn't. Before he could question her further, the door slammed open so hard a rack of postcards rattled. Blair barged in with the enthusiasm of a man hoping to catch someone committing treason. "There ye are, Macbeth," he barked. "Up to mischief again." Hamish straightened. "I'm examining evidence." "Evidence?" Blair strode forward and snatched the torn wrapping from Hamish's hand. "This belongs to Strathbane." "It was in Morag's storeroom," Hamish said through his teeth. "Not sent, not logged." "Aye, because you hid it," Blair said triumphantly, "trying to protect your wee villagers again." Morag gasped. "I never." "Oh, hush," Blair snapped. "You've caused enough trouble." Lugs growled, low and steady. Blair glared at the dog. "Keep that beast away from me." Hamish stepped forward. "Blair, that parcel might contain something important. Let me—" "Do nothing," Blair said. "You've meddled enough. This goes to Strathbane." He snatched the lace and twine, then reached for Hamish's coat. "What else are you hiding?" Hamish blocked his grip. "You're not searching me." Blair smirked. "Daviot will love hearing that." He jerked his head at Anderson, who had finally wandered inside. "Bag it." Anderson took the soggy remains of the parcel, looking bored. "What about the woman?" he asked, nodding at Morag. "She'll be questioned later," Blair said, "if she remembers things properly." Morag looked ready to faint. Hamish shot her a brief, stiff glance that he hoped meant don't say anything else. Blair marched out with the parcel as though carrying a prize. "Try not to hide anything else, Macbeth," he called over his shoulder. "You've embarrassed yourself enough." The door shut, leaving the room too quiet. Morag sagged against a stack of leaflets. "Oh, Hamish," she whispered. "He'll blame me for all of it." "He blames everyone for everything," Hamish said. "Just keep quiet." Morag looked at him with large, wet eyes. "Should I tell the villagers?" "No," Hamish said sharply. "Don't breathe a word of it. Not to anyone, not even Mrs. Duff." Morag bristled. "I can keep my silence." "We'll see," Hamish muttered. Gossip in Lochdubh travelled faster than electricity. He bent to retrieve the lace, but it was gone. Blair had taken the lot. Only a tiny thread remained on the floor, caught on a splinter of wood. Hamish plucked it up. A white lace thread with a faint rust tint. The vestry window's curtain, he was almost sure. Someone had torn it, and someone had wanted to send it to Ian. The thought sat badly in his gut. Hamish turned to Morag. "Lock the storeroom, and if Blair comes back, tell him nothing." Morag nodded weakly. Hamish left with Lugs close at his heel. Outside, the village looked ordinary again, which made it worse. Folk passed him with the polite curiosity of people who wanted to ask questions but didn't dare yet. The faint smell of peat smoke drifted from chimneys. It meant nothing. Fiona Campbell was still dead, and now the one decent lead had been snatched by Blair, who would mishandle it out of spite or stupidity. By late afternoon, Hamish passed the post office again. The front windows glowed with lamplight. It was nearly dark, yet the back storeroom light was still on. He stopped. Morag never worked late. Never. Luggs let out a small, uneasy whine. Hamish stared at the lit window. Someone was inside. Maybe Morag. Maybe not. He took a step forward, but someone moved behind the frosted glass. A shadow, thin and quick, then gone. Hamish stood very still. The snow made no sound. His breath did. He turned back toward the station. The light in the post office burned on, steady as a warning. Hamish knew he should not have gone to the Kirk Hall, but he had run out of tea bags and patience, and Harris had cornered him outside the shop to announce with grim pride that every respectable person was attending the morning tea. In Lochdubh, that meant trouble was brewing more strongly than the tea. He pushed open the Kirk Hall door and felt the wrongness at once. The noise was too loud, the laughter too sharp. The women sat at their long tables like hens ready to peck something to death. They stopped mid-peck when they saw him. Mrs. Wellington, who always looked as if she was sniffing something unpleasant, said loudly, "Well, if it isn't Constable Macbeth, maybe he can tell us why Fiona Campbell was shouting at Morag behind the post office 2 nights before she died." Morag, seated a few chairs down, choked on her biscuit. "I never—" "Oh, you did," Mrs. Wellington snapped. "I saw it myself. You were waving your arms like a windmill." Morag flushed. "I was cold." "You were arguing," Mrs. Wellington insisted. "Don't pretend otherwise." Mrs. McLean from the hotel nodded helpfully. "And I heard Priscilla Halberton Smythe stood up for Fiona the next day. Said she was a decent girl. Very refined, she said." "That's not what she said," another woman piped up. "She said Fiona was too refined for this village." "Oh, that's worse," someone muttered. Hamish drew in a breath, wishing he'd stayed in bed. The smell of boiled tea and cheap cakes made his stomach turn. Even Luggs hesitated at the doorway, ears flattening. Hamish plastered on the sort of cheerful smile that fooled no one. "Morning, ladies." Silence met him, then a few stiff nods. Lochdubh women could outstare a mounted policeman when they wished. He moved to the table, trying to appear relaxed. "I don't suppose," he said lightly, "anyone's missing curtains?" There was a beat of confusion. Then the hall erupted in laughter so loud it rattled the windows. Some clapped. Some actually wiped tears. Morag hid her face. Mrs. Wellington looked at him as though he were an idiot. "Curtains," she said. "Hamish Macbeth. This is a murder investigation, not spring cleaning." The laughter rolled on. Hamish felt heat creep up his neck. He wished the floorboards would swallow him. He had meant the comment as a gentle prod about the lace he'd found, but villagers did not appreciate gentle prods. They appreciated mockery, especially when aimed at him. He forced a thin smile. "Just checking." "Oh, we're all relieved," Mrs. McLean said. "Imagine, Fiona Campbell killed by curtains. What a theory." More laughter. Hamish gave up then. He turned toward the door with Luggs close behind. Someone chuckled. Maybe ask the ghost in white if she stole the curtains. Another said, maybe Hamish is courting her. The joke stung more than it should have. He stepped outside into the cold air, grateful for the quiet. But peace never lasted long in Lochdubh. Priscilla appeared from around the corner, her coat immaculate and her expression unreadable. She moved with that calm, precise elegance that made Hamish feel like an unmade bed beside her. "Hamish," she said, "why were you provoking them?" He stiffened. "I wasn't provoking anyone. I asked a simple question." "You were mocking them," she said, "and they don't forget things like that." "I wasn't mocking them," Hamish snapped, sharper than intended. "I was doing my job. You wouldn't understand how Lochdubh works. You float above it all." Priscilla's face tightened just enough to show he'd struck the wrong note. "Float? Is that what you think I do?" He regretted the words immediately, but could not take them back. "Well," he muttered, "you don't exactly get your hands dirty with the likes of us." Priscilla drew herself up, even though she was shorter than him. "I came to help, Hamish, but if you prefer to sneer at me along with the gossiping hens—" "I didn't sneer," he said. "I stated a fact." Her eyes went cold. That always cut deeper than shouting. "Then here is another fact. If you cannot treat people decently while investigating a murder, you're going to lose what little trust you have left." She turned and walked away, boots crunching on the frozen ground. Hamish watched her go, feeling like a man who had dropped something important in the loch. Luggs nosed his hand as though checking whether Hamish was about to make things worse. He muttered, "Don't start." They walked back to the station. The village felt different, faces turning away slightly, conversations softening when he passed. Gossip moved faster than weather in Lochdubh, and he was already the loser in this round. By late afternoon, he was restless and irritable. Every time the phone rang, he expected Blair, or worse, another villager offering nonsense about the ghost woman. When the bell above Patel's shop jingled, Hamish pushed inside, thankful for any distraction. Patel looked up from the counter. "Constable Macbeth, you're out and about early." "It's 4 o'clock, Hamish said. "Yes, early." Patel gave him a narrow look. "The village is talking. They say you laughed at the Kirkhall women." "I didn't laugh," Hamish said tightly. Patel shrugged. "It sounded funnier in the telling." Hamish groaned. "I need tea bags." Patel set a box on the counter but didn't ring it up yet. He leaned in, conspiratorial. "You know, someone bought bleach here the night before the nurse died, and gloves, and a bottle of kerosene." Hamish froze. "Who?" Patel frowned. "I didn't see their face properly. They wore one of those long scarves. Wool, red, covered half their head." "A red scarf?" Hamish felt his pulse shift. "Man or woman?" "I can't say," Patel said. Voice was quiet. "They paid cash. One of those people who think it's clever to be mysterious." Hamish typed the information into his head, though he knew Blair would twist it into nonsense. "You could have told me earlier," Patel sniffed, insulted. "I wasn't sure it mattered until gossip said the nurse was killed by someone she knew, so then it mattered a great deal." "Did they say anything else?" Hamish pressed. "Yes," Patel said. "They said, 'I need this tonight,' as if I cared about their plans." Hamish felt the unease again. A red scarf. He had seen so many in Lochdubh he might as well accuse the entire village. Patel handed him his tea bags. "Don't say I never help." "Help?" Hamish said. "Half the village thinks I insulted them." Patel smiled. "You did, but I'm used to it." Hamish left before he said something regrettable. Outside, the sky had darkened to that bleak midwinter shade that made Lochdubh look older and meaner. Lugs trotted beside him, occasionally glancing up as though waiting for Hamish to admit the day had gone poorly. Back at the station, Hamish set the kettle boiling. He thought of Priscilla's face when she had turned away, of Morag's shaking hands, of the torn lace, and now this mysterious shopper in a red scarf. Too many threads, none matching neatly yet. The kettle clicked off. Hamish poured the water but didn't drink. The station felt hollow, as if something were missing, something Blair had stolen or the villagers had taken bit by bit. Lugg settled near the fire, though he kept one eye open. Hamish looked out the window at the darkening village. He felt the day's mistakes pressing in, quiet and heavy. Somewhere in Lochdubh someone was lying, someone who wore a red wool scarf. The day started wrong, which was no surprise. Hamish had barely finished scraping the frost from the station door when Sandy McGregor, one of the fishers, came stomping up the path as though chasing someone. "Hamish!" he shouted. "You'd better come, there's been a fire by the loch." Hamish stiffened. "A fire? Where?" "Down by the bend, near the birch trees. Something burned right down to nothing." Luggs gave a sharp bark, already uneasy. Hamish grabbed his coat and followed Sandy, who marched ahead with the speed of a man certain he had discovered something important and unwilling to let anyone else claim the honour. They reached the loch's edge where the land dipped into a patch of scrub. The snow there had melted in a wide circle, leaving a churned mess of mud and ash. Sandy jabbed a finger at it. "There. Someone's been burning stuff. Glass melted. Whole place stinks of kerosene." Hamish crouched. The ash was still warm. Lugg sniffed at the perimeter, tail low. Hamish brushed aside a clump of ash and uncovered the warped neck of a whiskey bottle melted into a cruel twist. A few inches away lay a curved bit of metal, blackened but familiar. A watch strap. Same style Fiona Campbell had worn. Hamish felt a jolt. "Sandy, you didn't tell Blair?" "Blair?" Sandy scoffed. "I'd rather tell the devil. Besides, I saw you first." Of course he had. If Blair learned Sandy had come to Hamish first, there'd be hell to pay. Hamish pocketed the metal piece quickly. "Don't speak of this to anyone," Hamish said. Sandy bristled. "You think I gossip?" "Yes." Sandy looked offended, but not enough to argue. "Fine, but folk will see the smoke mark soon enough." Hamish sifted through the ashes again. Just charred scraps. Paper maybe, cloth maybe, nothing whole. He stood, brushing soot from his hands. Luggs gave a faint whine and nosed under a bush. Hamish followed and found a scrap of fabric half frozen into the mud. Not fabric, more like a tag. He pried it loose. A torn coat label singed around the edges. The wording was mostly intact. H. Smythe and Company, London. Hamish felt the hair rise on his neck. Smythe. Not a common name, not in Lochdubh, and Priscilla's family certainly had London connections. He slipped the tag into his coat before Sandy could see. "Best head back," Hamish said. "Storm coming." "I told you it was important," Sandy said proudly. "I've an eye for danger." "You've an eye for gossip," Hamish corrected, but he thanked him anyway. Back at the station, Hamish opened the door and froze. Blair and Anderson were waiting inside like two crows on a fence. Blair wore a sour grin that meant trouble. "There he is," Blair announced. "Macbeth, explain this." Anderson held up an envelope. Cheap paper, creased, slightly damp. "What's this meant to be?" Hamish asked. "A confession," Blair said triumphantly, "from your friend Ian McIver." Hamish snatched it before Blair could wave it about. The writing inside was messy, hurried, no signature, just a few lines claiming Fiona's death was a mistake and begging forgiveness. "This is rubbish," Hamish said. "Ian didn't write this." "Of course he did," Blair said. "It was shoved under the station door this morning." Hamish glared. "Who saw it first?" "I did," Anderson said, puffing up. "Exactly," Hamish muttered. Anderson was the least observant man alive. Blair folded his arms. "Davitt says you're being suspended for interfering with the investigation." Hamish's chest tightened. "Suspended? For what?" "For obstructing Strathbane," Blair said gleefully. "For hiding evidence. For questioning people without authority. Pick whatever ye like." "I've done none of that." "Aye, but Davitt believes I have," Blair said. "And that's what matters." Hamish fought to keep his face empty. He could feel Luggs beside him, tense, picking up the anger in the room. Hamish forced a calm he did not feel. "I want to speak to Davitt myself." Blair shrugged. "He's busy. He'll call when he cares." Hamish looked at the confession again. Something was wrong. The loops on the letters, the slant, the shape of the T's. No way a farmer like Ian wrote that. A woman's hand. Someone hurrying, someone frightened. But he said nothing. Blair would only seize it. "Well," Blair snapped, "nothing to say?" "No," Hamish said, "not to you." Blair smirked. "Enjoy your last day as constable." He strode out, Anderson shuffling behind like a badly trained shadow. Hamish let the door shut. He leaned against the desk. Luggs pressed against his leg, warm and steady. Hamish reached down, giving him a slow stroke. "Blair's an idiot," Hamish murmured, "but idiots can still ruin things." The kettle clicked. Hamish barely noticed. His head throbbed with frustration. A knock came at the open door. Priscilla stood there holding a tin. Her expression was careful as always. "I heard Blair was here," she said. "I thought you might need tea." Hamish blinked at the tin. "For Luggs," she added, setting it down. "Biscuits." Luggs wagged his tail, uncertain, as if checking Hamish's reaction before deciding if he deserved the treat. Hamish muttered, "Thanks. He'll enjoy them." Priscilla hesitated. "Is it true about suspension?" "Probably," Hamish said. "Blair wants my job." "Blair wants your dignity," she said. "Job's just decoration." It nearly made Hamish smile, which annoyed him. "I've work to do, or whatever's left of it." She studied him a moment in that distant, pained way she had when she wanted to say more, but refused to. "If you need anything—" "I don't," he said too fast. "But thanks." Hurt flickered. Barely. Then she nodded and left before he could clumsily make it worse. Hamish shut the door. The station felt colder. He sat by the fire with the confession letter. Luggs lay at his feet, crunching a biscuit. Hamish spread the note open. The handwriting confirmed what he already suspected. It was a woman's. The loops were tidy even where rushed. The lines tilted upward. It lacked the blunt weight of a man's hand. "Someone's setting you up, Ian," Hamish muttered. "Or setting me up. Probably both." The snow outside thickened, tapping the window like someone wanting attention. Hamish fed more peat to the fire. Sparks flared, then settled into the low, steady burn he liked. He folded the confession carefully and slid it into an old biscuit tin under his desk. Blair would never think to search there. He planned to compare the writing to the women of Lochdubh, quietly, without Blair's nose spoiling it. Luggs shifted, ears twitching toward the window. Hamish looked too. Snow blurred the world beyond, turning the village into a dim, muffled shape. Somewhere out there was the person who had burned the bottle and the watch strap. Someone who wore a coat with a London tag. Someone who wrote confessions for other people. Hamish lay back in his chair. The fire crackled faintly. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll start again tomorrow." Luggs thumped his tail once but didn't lift his head. Hamish stared into the flames as the wind rose outside, uneasy and restless, like a warning he could not yet read. Blair arrived at the station before Hamish had finished feeding Luggs. That alone meant something was wrong. Blair never came early unless he planned to ruin someone's day, and usually that someone was Hamish Macbeth. Hamish heard the shouting before he reached the front door. Luggs bristled and trotted ahead, hackles raised. When Hamish turned the corner, he found Blair dragging Ian McIver out of the back of the police car like a sack of spoiled potatoes. Anderson stood behind them, wearing the satisfied look of a man who had done nothing useful but hoped no one noticed. "What's going on?" Hamish demanded. Blair threw him a triumphant glare. "Confession's enough for me. Ian McIver, you're under arrest for the murder of Fiona Campbell." The villagers had already gathered, half the crofters, a handful of the hotel staff, Morag hovering miserably, and old Mrs. Duff standing straighter than she had in years, soaking in the drama. Their whispers rose like steam. Hamish moved forward. "Blair, you cannot—" "I can," Blair snapped, "and I have." The man confessed. "I didn't," Ian shouted. His face was red, his eyes wild with panic. "I never wrote a bloody thing." "Of course you didn't," Blair said, his voice oily. "Macbeth helped you. Didn't you, Macbeth?" Hamish felt the world freeze around him. "What?" Blair smirked for the crowd. "Forge a letter. Slip it under your own door. You always were desperate for attention." A wave of shocked murmurs swept the villagers. Hamish felt the sting of it. Faces shifted. Sympathy turned to suspicion. Even Mrs. McLean from the hotel gave him a look as if she'd just realised she'd left him alone in the room with her purse. Hamish clenched his fists. "Blair, you know damn well I didn't—" "Oh, I know nothing," Blair said loudly. "Except you've been meddling since the start. Hiding parcels, asking about curtains, questioning people like you're something other than a village mascot." Laughter rippled cruelly through the crowd. Ian lunged toward Hamish. Tell him I didn't confess. Tell them I didn't kill her." Blair yanked him back. "Save it for Strathbane." Hamish reached for the letter in his pocket and froze. The biscuit tin. He had hidden it in the biscuit tin under his desk. Not on him. Blair saw the hesitation and seized on it. Look at him, scrambling for another forged clue. Hamish looked at the villagers, who were already stepping back from him as though foolishness were contagious. This was Lochdubh's way, supportive until it cost them something. Luggs barked once, sharp, furious. Hamish's voice came out colder than he intended. "You've made a mistake, Blair." Blair smirked. "Daviot thinks otherwise. He wants a word. Now." Hamish didn't trust himself to speak. He just turned and stalked toward his car, Luggs at his heels. The villagers parted, whispering, glancing. Someone muttered, "I thought Hamish liked Ian." Another said, "Or maybe that's the problem." He refused to look back. Daviot's office in Strathbane always smelled of desperation and bad heating. Hamish walked in stiffly, barely nodding at Anderson, who had driven there too slowly and too smugly. Daviot stood behind his desk, arms folded, expression sharp and self-important. "Macbeth," he said, "have you lost your mind?" Hamish didn't wait for permission. "I want that letter, the confession, now." "You'll get nothing," Daviot snapped. "You're lucky you're not suspended outright." "Ian didn't write it," Hamish said. "Any fool could see—" "Oh, do stop insulting your colleagues," Daviot hissed, pacing. "Blair believes the letter credible. That's good enough." "Blair couldn't identify credible evidence if he tripped over it," Hamish said. Anderson snorted before catching himself. Daviot slammed a hand on his desk, face reddening. "You are meddling in a Strathbane investigation. Again. You are humiliated in your own village. Again. And now you demand I hand over evidence. No." Hamish took a step forward. "She didn't die by accident. Someone burned her belongings by the loch. Someone is planting evidence against Ian. Someone broke into my station and—" "You think I believe thieves break into your shabby station?" Daviot scoffed. "For what? Biscuits?" Hamish's jaw clenched. "Give me the letter." "No. It's not his handwriting." "I don't care." Hamish stared at him, feeling the futility of it settle like a stone. Davitt lifted his chin. "You will step back," he said. "If I hear you've interfered once more, I'll remove you, permanently." Hamish turned and walked out before he said something he couldn't take back. The drive back to Lochdubh was silent except for Lugs's uneasy breathing. When they reached Hamish's cottage, the wrongness hit him immediately. The kitchen door was ajar. Lugs leapt out before Hamish could stop him, barking wildly. Hamish rushed in behind him. The cottage wasn't ransacked. Everything looked ordinary. Too ordinary. The kettle hissed on the hob, nearly burned dry. Someone had been inside long enough to make themselves at home. He went straight to the biscuit tin, lifted the lid, empty. The letter was gone. Lugs padded around the room, nose low, confused rather than alert. Whoever had entered had already gone. No scent for him to track. Hamish shut the tin. Too hard. The clatter echoed in the small kitchen. Someone in Lochdubh knew where he hid things. Someone who wanted the letter more than Blair did. Someone who didn't care about breaking into a policeman's home. It wasn't the kind of thought that made sleep easy. 2 hours later, a knock sounded at the door. Hamish expected Blair, ready for more crowing. Instead, a young footman from the Halberton Smythe estate stood there, flushed from the cold. "Message from Miss Halberton Smythe," he said, offering a folded note. Hamish opened it. "I found something. My father's tailor once used a London supplier, H. Smythe and Company. Entire estate uniforms came from them years ago. The burned coat might not belong to Ian. Thought you should know. It was signed simply P." Hamish stared at the note, feeling the faint sting of embarrassment. He had snapped at her more than once this week. She still sent him something useful. H. Smythe and Company, the label from the burned coat. Her household staff would have worn items supplied by them. A servant might have torn a coat, burned evidence, left traces by the loch. A servant with reason to hide something. Hamish looked out into the night. Snow had begun again, falling thick and quiet. Lochdubh lay buried in it, pretending innocence it never had. His reputation was in tatters. The villagers doubted him. Blair wanted him gone. Someone had stolen the letter from his own kitchen, and now the burned coat pointed straight toward Priscilla's world, a world where Hamish had never belonged and never would. He folded her note and slipped it into his pocket. "Come on, Lugs," he murmured. "We're not done yet." But the cottage felt uneasy, as if someone might return at any moment. He banked the fire lower, checked the doors twice, and sat in the dim light staring at the snow-covered window. Tomorrow, Lochdubh would have more whispers, and Hamish Macbeth would have fewer friends. Hamish knew he was making a mistake the moment he stepped off the road and into the trees that bordered the Halberton Smythe estate. Anyone seen heading up the long gravel drive would become instant conversation in Lochdubh, and this case already had enough gossip choking it. Still, something about the burned coat tag nagged him. H. Smythe and Cobham. He needed answers before Blair twisted everything beyond repair. Lugs padded beside him, ears twitching every few steps. The dog didn't like the estate grounds. Too tidy, too foreign. Hamish agreed. He skirted behind a row of yews and approached the servants' entrance. The back door stood open a crack, which was already wrong. McKinnon, the butler, normally guarded the house as if it were a bank. Hamish knocked gently. McKinnon appeared almost immediately, pale as candle wax and breathing too fast. "Constable," he said with a strained bow, You should not be here." "Then why leave the door open?" Hamish asked, stepping inside before the man could block him. McKinnon swallowed. "I needed air." "That's not air," Hamish said. "That's panic." He kept his voice soft, though irritation tugged at him. "We need a word." McKinnon's eyes darted down the corridor as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Not here. Miss Priscilla is in the music room." "All the better," Hamish said. "She has good hearing." That earned a faint squeak of alarm. "No, please, this is private." Hamish motioned toward the servants' pantry, a cramped room lined with jars and boxes. McKinnon followed him inside, twisting his hands. "You're hiding something," Hamish said plainly. "Best tell me before Blair does worse." At the mention of Blair, McKinnon winced as though struck. "I didn't kill her," he whispered. "I swear it. Fiona, she found something that belonged to the estate, something missing for years." Hamish's pulse jumped. "What sort of something?" "A brooch, Mackinnon said, voice trembling. Lady Halberton Smythe's mother's brooch. It vanished long before Miss Priscilla grew up. A family piece, very old. I misplaced it back then. Misplaced, Hamish repeated, letting the unfair tone hang. Mackinnon's shoulders wilted. I stole it, he whispered, just for a little while. I thought I could buy it back later, and then it disappeared. I thought it was gone forever. Hamish stared at him. He wasn't sure whether to pity the man or throttle him. And Fiona had it? She brought it here, Mackinnon said, 3 days before she died. She said someone had sold it to a dealer in Strathbane. She bought it from him. She said the estate should have it back, but she wanted compensation. Compensation, Hamish echoed, for returning stolen property. Mackinnon flushed. She hinted she might tell Miss Priscilla everything, or the papers. I begged her not to. I told her I'd find the money. She didn't believe me. Hamish felt the shape of it forming. And the night she died, she came back, left a parcel at the post office, she said, to force my hand. Mackinnon raked a hand through his thinning hair. She wouldn't listen. She said she was tired of secrets. Hamish leaned closer. The white figure by the loch, was that you? Mackinnon sagged. Yes. Hamish blinked. You? I panicked, Mackinnon said miserably. I thought the parcel contained a letter exposing me. I needed to retrieve it. I had nothing to disguise myself with. I grabbed an old lace curtain from the laundry, wrapped it round me. It was foolish, I know. Foolish? Hamish muttered. Folk thought they saw a banshee. Mackinnon groaned. I didn't mean to start rumours. I just wanted the parcel. You retrieved it? No, I never found it. Someone else must have taken it first. Hamish nearly told him that Blair had seized the ruined parcel that morning, but he held back. Mackinnon was already about to collapse. And Fiona? Hamish asked. Did you see her that night? No, Mackinnon said quickly, too quickly. I left before she arrived, I swear it. She was alive when I left. Hamish narrowed his eyes. He was about to press harder when footsteps sounded from the hallway. Mackinnon jerked upright. No, please. Too late. Priscilla stood in the doorway, her face pale and rigid. Mackinnon, she said quietly, what is this? Mackinnon's mouth opened and shut like a landed fish. Hamish stepped aside, feeling that familiar discomfort burrow under his ribs. Priscilla's gaze flicked to him, sharp as a blade. What are you doing here, Hamish? Investigating, he said, keeping his voice steady. It sounds more like interrogating my staff. Mackinnon burst out. Miss Priscilla, I can explain, but that was when the front door slammed so hard the sound carried through the house. Heavy, triumphant footsteps echoed closer. Blair. Hamish felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. Of all the cursed times for Blair to appear. Blair strode in, coat flapping, Anderson lumbering behind like a misplaced wardrobe. A reporter from the Strathbane Gazette trailed them, notebook already open. Just as I thought, Blair roared. Macbeth interfering again. And what do we have here? The butler confessing? Lovely. Mackinnon shrank back, horrified. Priscilla stepped forward, fury in her posture. Inspector Blair, she said icily, you are trespassing. I'm making an arrest, Blair crowed. Mackinnon, you're coming with us. For what? Priscilla snapped. Blair grinned. For confessing to Macbeth here, we heard enough. Anderson? He nodded like a king ordering a beheading. Anderson moved in to grab Mackinnon. Hamish stepped between them. Hold on, Mackinnon didn't confess to murder. He confessed to theft years ago. And if anyone's to blame for Fiona's death, Blair shoved him aside. Actually shoved him. Enough, Macbeth. You're finished. Davitt knows you sneaked off here, hiding more evidence, no doubt. The reporter scribbled eagerly. Hamish's face burned. Priscilla watched, stunned, as Blair hauled Mackinnon toward the door without ceremony, shouting orders as though commanding troops. You'll regret this, she said to Blair. Her voice was low and shaking. Blair snorted. Doubt it. Then they were gone. Blair, Anderson, Mackinnon stumbling between them, and the reporter drinking in every detail. Hamish stood in the middle of the pantry, feeling like he'd been slapped in front of a crowd. Priscilla turned to him slowly. You brought him here, she said. You dragged all of this into my home. Hamish bristled. I didn't drag Blair. He follows me like a bad smell. That may be, Priscilla said, but your judgment is disastrous. Hamish stiffened. Mackinnon is hiding something. You know it. I know it. And now half of Strathbane knows it too, she said bitterly, because Blair chose to humiliate him in front of my house, and you. Hamish opened his mouth, but Priscilla had already turned away, leaving him alone in the quiet, cramped room. He let out a long breath. Luggs nudged his leg gently, as if trying to reassure him in the only way he understood. "Come on," Hamish muttered. "Let's see what's left." They searched briefly for the brooch among Mackinnon's belongings. Nothing. Not a trace. Not even an empty box. Either Mackinnon never had it, or someone had taken it first. Outside, the wind cut across the estate lawns. The snow was beginning again, soft at first, then heavy. Hamish walked slowly back toward his cottage, Luggs close beside him. He felt vindicated. Mackinnon had lied, and badly. He also felt defeated. Blair had seized the moment, stolen the authority, made him look foolish again. And Priscilla? Well, she had looked at him as if he'd tracked mud into her sitting room. Back home, Hamish shut the door and leaned against it. The cottage felt small and tired. Luggs curled by the fire, watching him with quiet confusion. "Bloody Blair," Hamish muttered. "Bloody everything." He sat, staring at the flickering peat flames. Somewhere in Lochdubh a brooch was missing, a butler was lying, a killer was watching, and Hamish Macbeth had never felt less trusted. Hamish knew something was wrong the moment he stepped into the station. The air felt close, as if the walls had shifted while he was gone. Luggs padded in first, nose twitching. Hamish shut the door behind them and noticed, with a jolt, a small thread on the floor, red, curled, and too bright for anything that belonged in the shabby room. He bent down and pinched it between his fingers. Wool. Same shade as the thread found under Fiona's fingernail. "Great," he muttered. "Now the evidence comes to me." Luggs gave a soft, uncertain whine and nosed under Hamish's chair. The dog emerged with more fibres caught on his whiskers, shaking them off like snow. A tiny clump of red wool fluttered to the ground. Hamish crouched again, heart tightening slightly. Whoever had been in here earlier, rifling through drawers or stamping their boots, had worn something shedding red wool, and Hamish had let half the village in recently, which meant nothing and everything. He set the fibres on the desk carefully, though there was nothing careful about his hands. The scarf, Patel's story, the broken threads, Fiona fighting. It was starting to take shape, a shape he did not like. He was still staring at the fibres when a knock sounded on the door. Priscilla stepped inside without waiting. She looked composed, which usually meant she was furious with him or herself or the entire world. "Hamish," she said, nodding once. He tried not to sound as tired as he felt. "You're here early. I wanted to tell you something before Blair ruins it." She glanced around the station, her gaze lingering on the mess Hamish had given up trying to hide. "Is this a bad time?" "It's always a bad time," Hamish said. It came out harsher than intended. Priscilla's expression tightened, but she continued. "My father's housekeeper, Agnes, used to wear a red scarf, every winter, always the same one. She said it belonged to her mother." She paused. "She left the estate 3 days ago, without notice." Hamish straightened. "Left? Why?" "No one knows. She told the cook she had an errand in Strathbane. She never returned." Priscilla clasped her gloves, her knuckles pale. "My father assumed she'd found another position, but she didn't collect her wages, or her trunk." Hamish felt the prickling certainty of a mistake he should have caught days ago. Small figure, lacy curtain, red scarf. He had let Blair shove him toward the butler while the real trouble wore a woman's coat tag and moved about the estate unseen. "Did she have any connection to Fiona Campbell?" Hamish asked. Priscilla hesitated. Her jaw tightened. "Agnes was jealous of her, I think. Fiona was charming. Agnes was not." "That's enough of a connection," Hamish muttered. Priscilla's eyes flicked to the fibres on the desk. "What's that?" "A mess," Hamish said. "Same as usual." She studied his face as though searching for something he would never give her. "Be careful, Hamish. Whoever did this, they're not finished." Then she left. No comforting words, no soft looks. Just that cool, distant warning that made him feel he'd failed her as badly as the investigation. Luggs let out a low grunt, nudging Hamish's knee. When Hamish didn't move, Luggs nudged harder, as if to push him toward action. All right, Hamish muttered. "We're going." He swept the fibres into a small envelope and grabbed his coat. On the way out, he remembered Mrs. Duff's whisper about white hands and a figure by the loch. He had dismissed it then. Old women saw ghosts the way fishermen saw storms. But maybe this ghost had simply been small, and moving quietly, and wearing stolen lace. Mrs. Duff lived only a short walk away, but Hamish nearly jogged, Lugs trotting anxiously at his side. The sky hung low and grey, not dramatic enough for any poetic nonsense, just dull and miserable, perfect for Lochdubh. When he reached her cottage, he knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. "Mrs. Duff, it's me." Still nothing. Hamish pushed the door gently. It creaked open an inch. Lugs growled, a deep rumble he rarely used unless something felt wrong. Hamish stepped inside. "Mrs. Duff." The elderly woman sat hunched in her armchair, staring at the cold hearth. Her hands trembled on her lap. When she saw Hamish, her eyes went wide with terror, then relief, then terror again. "She's been here," Mrs. Duff whispered, "the one with the white hands." Hamish's skin prickled. "What one?" "The one ye asked me about," she said, voice shaking. "The one in the white, the curtain thing. She came to my door, tapped on the window. I didn't answer. I hid. I heard her breathing." Hamish glanced at the small window. A smudge streaked the lower glass, like someone had pressed a coat or scarf against it. He stepped to the hearth and knelt. The ashes looked disturbed, not by Mrs. Duff poking the fire, but by something shoved in hastily. He picked up a cold clump. Ash fell away, revealing fibres. Red wool faintly curled. His breath hissed out. The killer had been here, not days ago. Recently. Too recently. Mrs. Duff watched him like a frightened child. "I told you she was real. I told you someone was outside, but no one listens to old women unless we're knitting their socks." Hamish stood. He felt the weight of his mistake settle heavily. He had chased the wrong suspects, let Blair humiliate the right ones, and all the while the person moving through Lochdubh like smoke had walked past them unnoticed. "Mrs. Duff," he said quietly, "did you see her face?" "No," she whispered, "but she moved fast. Too fast for someone heavy, light on her feet like a bird, but angry. I felt it through the door." Hamish nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. His thoughts were too sharp and uneven. He checked the window again. The faint smear held a tiny fragment of wool. He scraped it off with his nail. "Stay inside," he told her, "and bolt the door. Don't answer anyone unless it's me." "I'm not answering anybody," she said firmly. "Maybe not even you." Hamish almost smiled at that. Almost. Outside, the cold loch air cut at his face. Lug stayed pressed close to his leg, tail stiff. The dog sensed danger now, not just tension. Hamish looked toward the estate in the distance, then toward the village, then toward the loch itself, dark and still under the grey sky. The killer hadn't run. She was here, somewhere in Lochdubh, moving quietly, watching. He tightened his coat around him. "We're close, Lugs," he murmured. "Too close, probably." Lugs gave a low whine. Hamish started back toward the station, not liking how exposed the village paths felt now. Every door, every window, every scarf flapping on a washing line seemed to hold a piece of the puzzle, or a threat. He had missed the truth once. He would not miss it again. But the thought did nothing to ease the unease coiling in his gut as he walked. Snow was already drifting sideways when Hamish stepped onto the loch path. It wasn't the pretty kind the tourists liked. It was the mean, creeping kind that stung the face and hid the ground. Lugs pressed close to his leg, uneasy. The dog hadn't stopped pacing since sunset. Hamish tugged his scarf tighter and scanned the shoreline. Nothing but shadows and the faint glimmer of the frozen loch. He hated waiting. Waiting gave the mind too much room. He pushed his hands into his pockets and felt the edges of the cracked watch he'd taken from Blair's evidence box when Anderson wasn't looking. Fiona's watch. Stopped at 9:20. Agnes had been in Lochdubh that night. Agnes had been at Mrs. Duff's window. Agnes had left red wool everywhere like some demented trail, and Agnes had vanished the moment the brooch appeared. He should have seen it sooner. A crunch sounded behind him. Hamish swung around, heart thumping, only the wind shifting the snow. Lugs gave a low whine, not fear exactly, more like recognition. "Where is she then?" Hamish whispered. The answer came slowly, a faint glow through the swirling white. A lantern, moving with small, sharp jerks, as if the hand holding it trembled. "Stay," Hamish told Lugs, though the dog ignored him and planted himself beside Hamish's boots like a furry shield. The figure moved closer, small, thin, wrapped in layers of old clothing, and around her neck, bright even in the dimness, a red scarf. Agnes. Her boots crunched on the packed snow as she reached the frozen edge of the loch. She lifted the lantern higher, revealing her face, drawn tight, streaked with cold tears, or snow melting on hot skin. Hard to tell. "You're in my way, Constable," she said, not frightened, angry. "You've been busy," Hamish replied, "breaking into houses, haunting Mrs. Duff, burning the evidence. Should I keep going?" Her mouth twisted. "You don't know anything." Hamish stepped forward. "I know enough. You were after the parcel. You were the white figure. McKinnon wasn't clever enough for any of that." "McKinnon is a fool," she snapped. "He stole the brooch years ago, but Fiona wasn't after him." Hamish frowned. "She said she'd expose him." "She lied," Agnes spat the word. "She wanted money. She wanted more than money. She said if I didn't pay her, she'd go to Miss Priscilla." Agnes's voice rose to a bitter edge. "She wanted to destroy me. Me. After all my years there. After everything I held together." Hamish felt the shift in the air. Something raw breaking open. Lugs growled, low and warning. "Tell me what happened," Hamish said. "Truth this time." Agnes's lantern wavered. "She came to the estate again, late, bold as a thief herself. She flaunted that brooch, said I should pay triple or she'd say I'd stolen more. She wanted to push me, humiliate me." "You hit her," Hamish said quietly. Agnes blinked, stunned he'd said it so simply. Then she nodded. "I shoved her, harder than I meant. She fell, struck her head on the stone step. There was blood, too much. Her breath clouded in the cold. She didn't move." Hamish's throat tightened. He didn't speak. "I panicked," Agnes went on. "No one would believe me. They'd think it was jealousy, or revenge. I dragged her down to the loch. I thought the cold would take her, hide her. But the ice wasn't thick yet. She broke through, the water took the rest." Hamish had heard many confessions. This one was worse because of its plainness. No flourish, no excuses. Just a tired woman telling the truth because she'd run out of lies. "And the parcel?" he asked. "She'd left it at the post office. Said it contained proof of my crime. I went back the next night to get it. That old curtain was the only thing at hand. I didn't want to be seen. Foolish, but it worked. People see ghosts when they want to." Hamish thought of Mrs. Duff shaking in her chair. "You terrified half the village." "I don't care about them," Agnes snapped. "I only wanted the parcel." "You found it too late," Hamish said. "Blair took it." Agnes's face twisted. "Blair is an idiot." That, Hamish admitted silently, was undeniable. He took a step forward. "Agnes, it's finished. You'll come with me. No more running." "No," she said sharply, stepping back. Her heel brushed the loch's frozen edge. The lantern swung wildly. "I'm not going to prison. Not after a lifetime of service. Not after all the ungrateful—" "Agnes," Hamish cut in, "stop moving. The ice isn't safe." She didn't listen. She backed away again, breath heaving, tears streaking her face. "I won't let Blair destroy me." Her foot slipped. Hamish lunged just as the ice cracked beneath her weight. A jagged sound tore through the night. Agnes dropped the lantern, which skittered across the ice before rolling into darkness, and pitched forward as the ice gave way entirely. "Hamish!" she shrieked as freezing water swallowed her up to the shoulders. Lugs barked wildly at the edge, frantic. Hamish didn't think. He dropped flat onto the snow, spreading his weight, and reached for her wrist. Her fingers were cold, clawing. "Hold still," he grunted. "You'll pull us both in." She didn't hold still, of course. People never did. She thrashed like a hooked fish. The ice beneath them groaned. Hamish dug his boots into the snow and heaved. Agnes screamed as he dragged her halfway out, water pouring from her clothes. She slipped once, nearly taking him with her, but Hamish gripped harder. His arms burned. His chest felt like it might crack. "Stop wriggling," he snapped. "If you want to live, stop wriggling." Somehow she did. One last pull and she slid fully onto the ice, sobbing, hair plastered to her face. Hamish rolled her onto the snow, away from the broken patch. Lugs pressed against them, whining. "Up," Hamish ordered gently. "We need to get you warm." But Agnes didn't stand. She stared at him with a mixture of hatred and relief. "I should have left Lochdubh years ago." "Aye," Hamish said. "Maybe so." A blaring siren cut through the night. Blair's police car screeched into view. Anderson tumbled out, slipping on the snow. Blair strode over, self-importance puffing him up like a wet hen. "Well, well," he said loudly. "Macbeth saves the day but ruins the evidence as usual." Agnes barely glanced at him. She was too cold to care. Blair snapped handcuffs onto her wrists with unnecessary force. "You're under arrest for murder." Agnes didn't resist. She only whispered, "I never meant to kill her." Blair rolled his eyes. "They all say that." Hamish stepped between them. "Blair, be careful. She nearly drowned." "Good," Blair muttered. "Less paperwork." Hamish's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Blair dragged Agnes toward the car. Anderson followed, fumbling with a blanket. Luggs nudged Hamish's hand once the others were out of earshot. The dog's eyes were wide and dark, mirroring the cold confusion settling inside Hamish. The confession was true. The brooch was stolen. Fiona had pushed the wrong woman too far. Agnes had cracked the watch exactly when Fiona fell, just as its broken hands showed. The truth was there, plain as footprints in the snow. And yet, Hamish felt no triumph, only relief it was over, and the familiar ache of being right too late, too clumsily, too publicly. When Blair's car finally pulled away, siren wailing into the night, Hamish stood alone by the loch with Luggs, snow gathering on his shoulders. "Come on, boy," he murmured. "Let's get home." But even as he walked, he glanced back at the dark water, uneasy. Cases ended. Trouble never did. The morning after the arrest began with the wrong kind of silence. Lochdubh didn't usually manage silence. There was always someone banging a gate or shouting across the road or arguing about the weather. But that morning, when Hamish stepped out of his cottage with Luggs trotting at his heel, the whole village seemed to have swallowed its tongue. The loch had frozen again overnight, hard and white as if it meant to hide every secret under a clean sheet. Hamish hated the look of it. Too neat, too final. Luggs sniffed at the air, then sneezed. The dog's breath puffed out in small clouds, and he stayed closer than usual, brushing against Hamish's knee as if unsure the world had quite righted itself. They walked through the square. A few villagers nodded to Hamish, but in that hushed, sideways way people used when they wanted credit for politeness, without risking gossip turning on them. Mrs. McLean muttered, "Well done, Hamish," so quietly it barely reached him. Then she scuttled inside the hotel before he could answer. A pair of crofters leaned outside Patel's shop. One of them whispered something, and the other said loudly, "Aye, but Blair said he caught her himself." Then, noticing Hamish, he pulled off his cap in a clumsy apology. "Morning, Constable." Hamish kept walking. Better to pretend he hadn't heard. Lochdubh had its own logic. Praise in secret, criticism in daylight. Patel saw him coming and stepped out before Hamish reached the door. "Constable Macbeth," he called too brightly. "I have something for you." Hamish braced himself. Patel in a cheerful mood usually meant trouble. Patel thrust a rolled newspaper into Hamish's hands. "Free copy today. Strathbane Radio is going on and on about the case. Blair did an interview." "Of course he did," Hamish muttered. Patel lowered his voice. "Don't worry. Here in Lochdubh we know who really caught the killer." "No, you don't," Hamish said dryly. "But thanks." Patel smiled sadly. "At least no ghosts now, eh?" Hamish gave a short snort. "Only living ones." Patel didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded briskly and retreated into the shop. Hamish unrolled the newspaper. Luggs pressed his cold nose against it. There it was, already smeared with printer's ink. A photograph of Blair in his too-tight uniform, chin stuck out like a rooster. The headline announced, "Inspector Blair ends Lochdubh murder mystery." Hamish crumpled the page and tucked it under his arm. He didn't care much for fame, but watching Blair claim credit for something he hadn't understood for a second made Hamish's teeth ache. He headed toward the Kirk Road, wanting to check on Mrs. Duff, but halfway there he saw Priscilla walking down from the estate track, wrapped in a neat navy coat, her hair pinned without a strand out of place. She walked as if she were trying not to disturb the snow. Hamish stiffened. He wasn't ready for whatever she might say. She stopped a few feet from him. "Hamish." He tipped his head. "Morning." She glanced away, then back, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to thank you for what you did last night." "It was my job," he said. "Mostly." "That doesn't mean it was easy." Her voice softened a fraction. "You risked your life to save hers." He shrugged. "Didn't feel like a choice." "It rarely is," she murmured. Then, with the faintest hesitation, "I'm sorry for doubting you." Hamish's ears went warm under the cold air. "You had reason. I blundered about." She gave a small, sad smile. "You usually do." Before he could think of a decent reply, she added, "McKinnon resigned this morning. I expect he'll go south. He asked me to thank you as well." "For what?" "For not letting Blair tear him apart publicly." Hamish shrugged again. "Didn't manage to stop that, did I?" "No," she said softly. "But you tried." She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded and walked past, her boots crunching neatly over the snow. He watched her go, feeling as though he'd been dismissed from an exam he never asked to take. Lugs barked once, impatient to move on. "All right, boy," Hamish grumbled. "Let's get home before someone else offers thanks I don't deserve." They reached the cottage just as another gust of wind swept over the loch. Hamish looked back at it, the pale surface gleaming under the early sun, smooth again, no sign of Agnes's desperate grasp or the hole that had nearly swallowed her. The loch had a talent for keeping its tragedies private. Inside, the cottage felt familiar, cramped and faintly smoky from last night's peat fire. Hamish tossed the paper on the table. Lugs nudged his food bowl with an exaggerated sigh. "Impatient brute," Hamish said, pouring kibble. Lugs dug in as if he hadn't been fed in weeks. Hamish lit the fresh peat. The fire gave a slow, steady glow, sensible and quiet. He made tea, the cheap kind he preferred, and stood with his mug near the window. He could hear faint voices from the village, the normal sounds returning after days of spectacle. Ian McIver had been released that morning. Blair had grunted about technicalities, then taken credit for steering the investigation, even though he'd steered it straight into a ditch. Lochdubh would forgive Blair sooner than it would forgive Hamish for being right. Hamish sipped his tea, staring out at the loch. He felt calm, but in that uneasy way calm sometimes came, after too much shouting, too many mistakes, and too little sleep. Someone knocked on the cottage door. Hamish groaned. It was Patel again, carrying a small packet wrapped in brown paper. "Nearly forgot," he said. "This came in with the morning delivery. Marked for you." Hamish raised an eyebrow. "From who?" "No return address. Found it wedged under the sacks." Hamish took it. Light. Probably a thank you note or a complaint. In Lochdubh they looked the same until opened. Patel leaned in conspiratorially. "Quite the hero, eh?" Hamish snorted. "A hero wouldn't have needed half the village to tell him what he should have noticed sooner." Patel grinned. "Then you're perfect for Lochdubh." Hamish shut the door before Patel could get sentimental. He unwrapped the packet. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No name, no handwriting at all, just a newspaper clipping. Blair being interviewed on Strathbane radio, beaming smugly. Hamish stared at it, baffled. Then he saw the note at the bottom in tiny print. "We know the truth, Hamish, even if he doesn't." He didn't recognize the handwriting. Might have been Mrs. McLean. Could have been Patel, or Morag, or someone too shy to say it aloud. Lugs padded over and put his head on Hamish's knee, warm and heavy. Hamish dropped the clipping on the table and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Well," he muttered, "it's something." He sat beside the fire, the warmth creeping slowly back into his fingers. Outside, the wind calmed and the loch lay still, white as bone, keeping the night's secrets under its perfect frozen surface. Hamish drank his tea in the quiet, Lugs snoring faintly, and told himself that harmony, however temporary, however uneven, had returned to Lochdubh. But he also knew the village well enough to expect new trouble sooner rather than later. Snow settled softly against the window. The fire cracked. Lugs twitched in his sleep. For now it was enough.